let's talk about one of the more important things that we're going to talk about today, or in general in fitness. And these kind of videos, when you see them, wherever you see them on the internet, are actually really important because they remind you of what you really need to do, which is to control your calories. So there's all kinds of equations out there. There's all kinds of calculators and everything like that, and I'll post some of them in the links as a link in the description just so you can plug in some numbers in if you want to. But as a general rule, someone who's moderately active is someone who works out about 3 to 5 hours a week and isn't completely sedentary at work or school. So basically, if you kind of move around during the day and you work out 3 to 5 hours a week, they consider you to be moderately active. A moderately active person, to calculate their calories, you take about 15, the number 15, times your body weight in pounds, multiply that together, and that equals your maintenance calories for your day, which is your calories that you need to do to basically break even. So if you have a 200-pound person and they burn off 15 calories per pound per day, then they're breaking even around 3,000 calories per day. And you can go up or you can go down to either, of course, gain weight or to lose weight. Now, what's interesting about that too, of course, is it's not precise. It usually ranges around 14 to 16 calories, but 15 is a pretty good number. And then you just kind of subtract or add because of real-world issues. So, for example, if you do 15 times your body weight and you subtract X amount of calories per day and you don't lose weight, you know that you're probably a little bit off on what you think your metabolism is, and then you have to lower the calories even more. The same thing with gaining weight. If you do 15 times your body weight, so 15 times 200 is 3,000, and you want to gain more weight and you go up by 500 calories, you don't gain weight, then you need to increase even more because you're probably a little bit more active than you thought you were. So that's kind of like a base way to do it. So if you think about it now, what do we do to get your calories kind of at that point? Like, what goes into your day? Okay, first thing, you'll often hear something called a basal metabolic rate, or your BMR, which is basically how many calories you burn off at rest. So if you don't get out of bed, you just lay there like a lump all day long, you burn off around 10 calories per pound per day. In reality, like 9 to 11, but we'll just say 10. So a 200-pound person, again, burns around 2,000 calories per day if they don't get out of bed. If they get up to take a leak, they probably burn off about 12 calories per pound per day, around 2,400 calories. And it kind of goes out from there. So you have your basal metabolic rate, you have your thermic effective activity. Thermic activity is how many calories you burn off doing things, like walking around, your work day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then you also have the thermic effect of food, which we'll come back to in a second. The thermic effect of food is how many calories it takes to actually process the food that you're eating. And on top of that, you have something interesting called NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which basically means calories that you burn off through something called fidgeting. And basically, it's little weird activities that they don't consider to be a straight-out exercise or a straight-out activity that actually burns off more calories. So, for example, people that sit up straighter, people that kind of pace around, people that kind of tap all the time, people that kind of move their legs. There's little things like that that can burn off a little bit of extra calories every hour, which ends up adding up to a lot. And we'll go back to that again a little bit later also. Now let's go back to the thermic effect of food for a second, because that's kind of interesting. Because you always get these people that go, oh my God, I read something that said, if you don't eat breakfast, it slows your metabolism down. And there was a study or two or more studies that actually said it did. And what happened was they took a population that didn't eat breakfast and measured the metabolism at the same time during that same morning against the population that did eat breakfast, and found out that the group that ate breakfast was burning off more calories right afterwards than the group that didn't eat breakfast. But years later what they discovered was it really was something called the thermic effect of food. So what ended up happening is when you ate the food itself, it took your body a certain amount of energy to process that food. And it comes down to like 1 or 2% per calorie, 1 or 2% of the calories of body fat, maybe 4% of the calories of carbohydrates, and 20% of the calories that you eat in protein is actually used to break down the food itself. So you had this other population, of course, didn't eat breakfast, and their metabolism seemed to be lower, but it didn't matter when it came to energy total or the energy equation for the entire day, because that was just a factor of total calories. So it didn't really matter when we ate the calories, because it would take the same amount of energy to break that down regardless over the course of the entire day, which of course makes sense. So whether I eat it now or eat it later, it took my body the same amount of calories to process it. Now, don't start to really factor that into your diet too much, because to be honest with you, the thermic effect of food tends to be calculated in the energy balance equation for the most part, and it usually isn't great enough to make a big difference. Where it can start getting interesting is if you were eating, like say, only protein. If you were eating 3,000 calories a day in protein, theoretically, 600 calories would be being used just to break down the protein, which is one of the advantages of having more and more protein in your diet when you're actually dieting. Not only do you feel more full, more satiated, and of course it has some anabolic properties because your muscles need protein, but at the same time you're actually losing a little bit of calories. You're kind of like playing with the math a little bit to see if you can burn off a little bit more calories per day, just because you tend to be a lot higher in protein than most people would be. Now, NEAT, going back to NEAT again, is kind of interesting also. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Now, this is where some of you that are really hard gainers could be having a legitimate problem. And NEAT usually applies to overfeeding more than anything else. So what they found was, in a couple studies, when they overfed a population, let's say they put you in a hospital and they overfed you an extra 1,000 calories above maintenance. So let's pick up some arbitrary numbers. Say you're 200 pounds and you burn off around 15 calories per pound per day. Now you're at 3,000 calories. And then they added 1,000 calories, now you're 4,000 calories a day. What they would find was that some people would burn off an extra 700 calories a day that they wouldn't be predicted by their normal activity levels. So basically they're burning off anywhere between, say, 300 to 700 calories extra just because. And what they did was they attributed that to something called, again, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, where what ends up happening is, for some reason, people are just a little bit more active in a way that you wouldn't normally consider to be exercise. Again, whether it's they just stand stiffer, whether they move a little bit faster, whether they pace back and forth, and things like that as a response to more food. And they thought that that might be an evolutionary advantage against obesity, because certain people, by burning off more calories, the more you feed them, would therefore not get fat. Now, what's kind of interesting about that is it's only an evolutionary advantage in places where you have plenty of food, because then you don't need to store fat. It wouldn't be such a good advantage if you were in like the Arctic, when you might want to store some extra fat cells just to keep you warm and to give you some more energy against starvation. But now think of that from a hard gainer point of view. A lot of you that are out there, or some percentage of you that are out there, when you overeat, you find, I'm still not gaining weight. How is this possible? Now, the first answer to that usually is, you're not actually adding up your calories properly. The second answer that usually is, and even more common, is that you're actually just lying. Not necessarily lying not exactly just lying to other people, but lying to yourself. You're just remembering your best days and not the average aggregate of a week or a month or a year or whatever and counting your calories. But some of you that aren't adding incorrectly and aren't actually lying, the actual reason would be that you start to do those little weird little things where you become more energetic and you start burning off more of the calories that you're using, that you think you're using to gain weight, which is kind of really fascinating if you think about it, because that's where the real world comes in, and that's where establishing those calories. So now if you're counting 15 times 200 is 3,000 calories, and you add 800 calories a day, and you would think, oh my God, I should be gaining weight, right? Maintenance plus 800. Well, if you're not, and maybe you are kind of a little hyperactive, maybe you are a little fidgety, so to speak, then you start needing to calculate up from there. And that's where counting your calories is very advantageous, because you can go, all right, well, if I get to 3,800, I'm not gaining weight. I'll go up to 4,100. If I'm not gaining weight there, I'll go up to 4,400, and we'll see what happens from there. That, again, is going to be something really important. So if you really wanted to, and kind of summing up a little bit now, like we're like 2/3 of the way through the video, if you want to control your calories like that, counting is really useful. However, what's even more useful at that point is establishing a menu. Believe it or not, most of the time, you eat the exact same foods anyway. You just don't realize you're eating the exact same foods. So even when you go out to eat, a lot of times if you go to a certain restaurant, you only pick between 2 or 3 different dishes every time you go there. And you can almost tell what you're going to eat on any given day by where you are and what time it is. So you got to make that work for you. So for example, let's say that you were trying to gain weight. Well, you would sit there and go, well, I normally eat, say, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a last meal late at night. How can you make those calories great enough? So we start switching out our foods to make the calories increase. So if you want to do, say 4 ounces of chicken, it's 120 calories. But 4 ounces of prime rib is 450 calories. So you can start working backwards from that goal. I'm going to start with 3,800 calories, and then I'm going to break it down into 4 different meals, and I'm going to determine how many calories I need for each meal, and I'm going to determine what actual food matches those calories, and I'm going to do it every day, no matter how boring it is, unless I go with my friends or something else like that to entertain myself, because you need some kind of life. Now, losing weight, you get the same prospect. Here we go. We take the 200-pound person again. We multiply his body weight by 15. We're at 3,000 calories. Well, according to basic theory, 1 pound of fat yields about 3,500 calories. So over a course of a week in 7 days, if I subtract 500 calories below maintenance for 7 days, that should be 3,500 calories or 1 pound of fat. Now, it's never completely linear. You never seem to lose exactly what the equation says that you should lose, but that does kind of give you an idea. And that's, again, where we come back to the idea of counting and menu. If we establish a menu and we eat the same exact foods every single day, and we know we're getting 3,000 calories, and we subtract 500, then we have a reasonable certainty that we're getting 2,500 calories, and we see if we get any kind of weight loss. Now, most people, if you're pretty heavy, you'd probably want to subtract about 1,000 calories a day to try to create 2 pounds of weight loss a week. And even there, you probably won't actually achieve that. Maybe more like 1.5 pounds or something. The way there's little error factors that go into it, but it gives you that kind of idea. Now, the leaner you are, the less calories you can probably subtract. You might want to do 700 or even 500, depending upon how actually thin you are at that particular point in time. And that could be a whole different video when we start talking about recomposition of body, depending on your diet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, to review there again, you want to take 15 times your body weight. That usually is your base calories if for a moderately active person, versus somebody who is not sedentary and works out 3 to 5 hours a week. And obviously you can go up or down depending upon what your real world results are. And then you can increase or decrease depending on whether you want to gain weight or lose weight. So we said if you lower it in 500 calorie increments below maintenance, you expect for every 500 calories that you lower per day, per 7 days, per week, you can lose up to, say, 1 pound. And you're not going to lose much more than 2 pounds a week no matter what, unless you're really kind of heavy to begin with. And when I say 2 pounds of weight, I really mean 2 pounds of fat. Obviously, you could drop 10 pounds of weight in a week when you talk about water, but that really isn't body fat. And that's another fallacy that you see a lot of times. People are like, oh my God, I lost 10 pounds of fat in 2 weeks. No, you really didn't. I mean, if you lost 4 pounds of fat in 2 weeks that you dropped 10 complete pounds, I would actually be pretty impressed. But anytime you lower your calories, and especially lower your carbohydrates, you tend to hold less water. And because you hold less water, you hold less weight. And that's one of the big, because you'll see that a lot for people doing shows. At the very end of the show, at the very end of the contest prep, in going into the show itself, they'll do something to actually make themselves lose actually more water, and that might be an extra 5, 6, or 7, or 8 pounds that they need to lose. Okay, so again, going back to that idea of losing weight, I hate to reiterate this, but this is kind of really important. In 500 calorie increments, 500 calories or 1,000 calories lower than maintenance per day, you lose 1 pound, 2 pounds of body fat per week, you're golden, life is good for you. Now, gaining weight, the one number I've seen, I really forget where I saw this a long time ago, they speculated it took about 2,400 extra calories to build a pound of muscle. And I'm assuming when they say pound of muscle in this particular case, they really mean actual tissue, like the actual myofibril tissue that creates a cross-section of the muscle that actually produces more force. Your body isn't always prepared to put on a pound of muscle, though, so it's not like you're just going to gain a pound of muscle a week. So you probably actually don't need that many more calories beyond maintenance. But some people themselves, they just don't eat enough in general. So it's a good idea to go a little bit higher than you think you need to, and just watch yourself to make sure you don't get fat. And one of the ways you can do that, of course, is just go, say, 400 calories below maintenance 3 days a week, and say maintenance the other days. You know what I mean? Or even a little bit lower in the other days, so maybe you can lose a little bit of body fat and ride the dips up a little bit. I mean, that's just another way to do it. Another thing you can do, too, is if you feel like you've been underweight for a while, and I know I covered this a little bit in the 800 calorie challenge video, if you feel like you've been underweight for a while, increasing your calories quite a bit more for a little while might fill you out. So because there's always a little bit of a swing that you have. And I'll give you an example. Have you ever been sick and you get a fever and you drop 6, 7, 8 pounds really quickly and you don't look very pumped and your muscles look very, really flat, and then about 2 weeks later you fill back out again? That's a situation a lot of people walk around in all the time because they're chronically under-eating enough that they're actually kind of flat. And when they eat some more, they get that kind of sarcoplasmic growth where now they're holding more water, more glycogen in their muscles, maybe increase the amount of mitochondria, I guess, if they start doing a little bit more repetitions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's almost completely what I wanted to cover. And I'll give you one last tip, or not tip, but one last review thing that I probably shouldn't have to mention, and you probably already know. When you think in terms of macros, you're thinking of total calories for the day and how your calories, what you're eating, fit into those total calories. So just to remind you, 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. 1 gram of carbohydrates is 4 calories. And 1 gram of protein is 4 calories. And when you start adding those up, that equals the macro, so to speak, and then the total equals the calories for the day. I think that's important because people don't necessarily think in terms of individual calories and individual grams of stuff. But I'll actually have people go, wow, because they just won't conceptualize that 20 grams of protein is 80 calories. And it's very rare, though, when you get 20 grams of protein that is just protein. 20 grams of protein in a hamburger is 80 calories of protein and 220 calories of fat. Okay, that's about all I want to cover on this particular topic. I think that's pretty much it. Again, in the description below, I'll put some of the equations down there that they use and a link to one of the calculators. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon.